Everybody tells you to have a plan in chess, but nobody actually explains where that plan comes from. And that's exactly what kept me stuck at 900 for over a year, until the day it hit me that a plan doesn't just pop into your head out of nowhere. It comes straight from the position, and that's exactly what I'm going to show you today. The step-by-step process I use to build a plan from any position that shows up in front of you. So yeah, no messing around. I'm Philip. Let's jump right in. So in this position, the knight came to e4 and then knight to d4, blocking that isolated pawn. And now here's the idea. I'm going to try to trade some pieces off and go after the pawn. So that would be my plan in the position. Then he plays knight to e5. And right here, we've already got a really interesting moment in the game because knight to e5 is a move that lets us trade pieces. But here's the thing, when you're playing an isolated queen's pawn position, you've got to know which pieces really matter in this kind of setup. And usually one of the key pieces is the bishop on d6. So I played knight to f5, and now I'm going to take that bishop on d6, especially since trading pieces always works in my favor here. My opponent takes the knight on f3 check, and you can tell he didn't really understand the position since trading pieces isn't good for him at all. And now, after bishop takes on f3, I'm threatening to take the bishop on d6, and on top of taking that bishop, I'm also setting up another threat in the position, which is knight takes on g7, or bishop takes on g7. So after queen to e6, which was a mistake by my opponent because he should have played queen to g5, which would have been the better move, we get to the point where we start to understand a little about how to actually evaluate a position. And how do we go about evaluating the position, guys? We're going to use 5 steps. And I'm going to walk you through these 5 steps in a really clear way so you understand the position well. And after that, we'll see how to apply all of it. So what's the first step to evaluate a position? Step number 1, the first thing you do to evaluate a position is look at who's got the safer king. And with the step of checking who's got the safer king, you're going to ask the position a few questions. For example, are the kings safe or not? Are they castled? Does this king have protection from a piece or from a pawn? Is there any weakness in the pawns that are defending it? Are the pieces protecting the king stable? Are there pieces stacked up ready to attack the king? And can you do something immediate against the king right away? So we're going to run through all of these questions to evaluate the king's safety. So what's the big mistake players make that I ended up noticing? When I ask whether the king is protected or not, the player looks at the position, sees the 3 pawns sitting in front of the castled king, and right away says it's protected. But that's not how you evaluate king's safety, because you've got to evaluate the king's safety using all those points I just showed you. Are there 3 pawns here? Sure, there are 3 pawns, but now let's take a look at the attack on each of the castled kings. So this king right here is under attack from the knight and from a bishop as well in the position, which means we've got 2 attacks happening at once. And now in my position, there's a bishop attacking, but I've got a bishop playing the role of defense. So clearly in this position, our king, my king in this case, and when I say our, people always say it's easy to play when the pieces are yours, but the point is that we've got the safer king. So that's the first step to evaluate the position. You've got to see which king is safer. And once you know that, you can already make an important decision. So if your king isn't safe, then you definitely shouldn't be attacking in a position like this. But if your opponent's king isn't safe, then you've got the signals that you can go ahead and attack in a spot like this. So that's the first step to evaluate the position. So let's move on now to our second step of how you evaluate the position, which is the material side of things. And this part's pretty easy, and I'm sure you guys do it all the time. Does somebody have more material? For example, is it 2 pieces against the rook? Is someone up the exchange? A rook against a bishop? A knight against a bishop? Is someone up a pawn or up 2 pawns? You're going to look at the position we're analyzing here, and for now, nobody's got a material advantage. But if I go knight takes on g7, then I'm up a pawn in the position. And of course, this move has to be calculated, because everything comes down to calculation. So up to this point, we've looked at the first step, which is king safety, and the second step, which is material. So let's move on to our third step now. Step number 3, which is the positional side of things. And what's the positional side? Does somebody have superiority in the center? Does somebody have a space advantage in the position? Does somebody have the bishop pair? Does somebody have control of files? Does somebody have a weak square? Does somebody have an outpost? But Philip, that's a whole lot of topics you're bringing up there. So guys, this right here is what we evaluate based on what you know about the strategic side, which means if you know a lot about strategy, you're going to have more elements to evaluate on the positional side. Now, if your strategic game isn't very strong, you're going to have less to evaluate. And that's exactly why it's important to study strategy together with the other topics you've got, all right? So, seeing that we're going to take a look at the strategic side, so how can we do that? We can compare pieces. For example, my light squared bishop is a lot better than my opponent's light squared bishop. And why is that? Because his bishop is running right into that wall of pawns. So that's the first thing you notice right away. The second important point is that our knight is directly attacking the castled king, so it's a lot stronger than our opponent's knight, which is attacking on f2. Another important point is that our dark squared bishop is better hitting the castled king directly on the best possible diagonal. And for those of you who already follow the channel, we talked about how this is the best possible diagonal. So logically, we've got 3 pieces that are superior compared to our opponent at this point. His queen is a little better than ours for the moment, and seems to be a bit more active. And as for the rooks, his rook is on a closed file, so that doesn't make a whole lot of sense. These are really important things in this position that you can already pull some clues from. And now you also look at whether there's any weak square or some other point to watch out for. But here I don't see anything else beyond pointing out the better pieces for white. So now we're going to move on to our 4th step for evaluating the position, which is the pawn structure side of things. Are there doubled pawns, an isolated pawn, a backward pawn, pawn islands, passed pawns, hanging pawns? Philip, I don't know what you're talking about with all these terms you're bringing up, so you need to study more about pawn structure and get to know the structures and the weaknesses that exist. Seeing that you're going to come into this position, look at it, and ask who's got the better pawn structure, black or white? And so I ask you, who's better in the pawn structure looking at this position, black or white? Exactly, white is better. And why is that? Because here we've got an isolated pawn, so the pawn structure is better, and there's also the pawn islands thing. Since here we've got 1 island, 2 islands, while he's got 3 pawn islands. So the more you know about chess, the more you can apply the concept of evaluating a position. So we evaluated the pawn structure side, and now there's the last part of the step, which is the tactical side. Are there pinned pieces? Are there hanging pieces? Are there pieces out of play? Are there overloaded pieces? Is there a mating scene? And I can also ask what my opponent threatens or what I threaten in the position. And if you look at that now in the position, what have we got here? We've got the bishop on b7 and the one on b2 hanging, and we've got a knight hanging, a queen exposed here in the position, and we've also got the attacks here on the castled king, which looks interesting. So what happens? If I take the evaluation of the 5 points I mentioned, on king safety, white is better. On the material side, it's equal. On the positional side, white is better. On the structural side, white is better. And on the tactical side, there's not much to talk about right now. So in a position like this, out of 5 factors, we're coming out ahead in 3. And if we're coming out ahead in 3, that means we're better. But that alone isn't enough for you to evaluate this position. Now that you've understood you've got the safer king, the better structure, and the better position, what does that mean? It means you should keep attacking. So if I'm in a position where I've got this much of an advantage, what do I mean by that? It means I've got to keep attacking and keep going forward. And so now I've got 2 options, where in the first one, with knight for bishop, I'm going to have a bishop pair advantage in the position, on top of the structure advantage and the better pieces, which is something I considered. And the other move was the one I played in the game. So in the game I played, knight takes on g7, which is the best move in the position, because on top of winning a pawn and exposing the king, I'm also attacking the queen. So with that, my opponent has to keep the queen defending the king, and that's why he played queen to h6. Now, it's always important to keep an eye on your opponent's threats, because even though it's clear we're better in the game, if you make a careless move, pulling the knight to f5 to try to attack the queen or win the bishop pair, you get mated on h2. So I played h3, giving my king a little air, and he came back with queen to g6, clearly without any plans. So I played bishop to h5. And what's the idea behind this move? The queen's got very few squares and needs to stay defending the king, which is really exposed, especially since there are already mating themes in the position, mainly combining queen and knight. And on top of that, the opponent's other pieces are really far away and need several tempi to get mobilized, which is exactly why we can't let that happen. Just like we saw in the previous videos, we should always look for attacking moves that at the same time are useful for improving our position. So here, my idea is to try to bring the queen to g4, pull the knight, giving a discovered check, and deliver mate on g7. And that was my plan when I got to this position. And in this position, if the opponent plays queen to h6, what do you play? queen to g4 or knight to f5. You already know that's exactly the idea, to bring the queen to g4 and have the knight on f5, but the move order is extremely important here. If you play queen to g4 first, there's a problem, because the opponent can play queen to g5 and try to trade the queens. So the position is still winning, but why allow that if we're attacking and the attack is infinitely stronger with the queen on the board? That's why the strongest move is knight to f5, attacking the queen. And always remember the moves that attack pieces. But in the game after bishop to h5 attacking the queen, he played queen to g5, so I followed with f4, another move attacking a piece, and more than that, opening up the g-file for our queen. In this position, the best move would be to give up the queen for the knight, but he followed with queen to e7, and that's when I went in with queen to g4. He played knight to f6, attacking my queen, but right after that, he already resigned, because there's a combination that finishes off the game, which is bishop takes on f6, queen takes, and now knight to e8 with discovered check wins the queen. So the queen has to go to g6, and it's a completely lost position for the opponent. So that's it. And notice one thing, I didn't guess a single move in this game. I read the position, king safety, material, the positional side, the pawn structure, and the tactical side, which means 5 questions. And it was just a matter of running the position through them for the answer to show up. I was better in 3. And when you're better like that, the board tells you to attack. But look, here's where I've got to be honest with you, because knowing you have to attack is only half the job. That's because the evaluation takes you to the door. It tells you attack here. But the one who opens the door is calculation, which is knowing which move comes first, the right order, and the trap that's hidden along the way. In this game, if I flipped 2 moves around, I'd lose the whole advantage. And it wasn't the evaluation that saved me from that. It was the calculation. So that's why these two go hand in hand, since evaluating without calculating is knowing where to go without knowing how to walk. And that's where most people get stuck, because you take these steps, apply them in your game, understand you're better, and then when it's time to convert, a complicated position opens up, and you go right back to calculating on impulse. That happens because knowing how to evaluate is one thing, but finding the right sequence until it becomes automatic is another. So that's why I created Think Ahead, my complete calculation course, which is the natural second step after what you learned today. Inside it, I take you from the basics to advanced, step by step, from when to calculate and when not to calculate, all the way to forced lines and advanced candidate move techniques with complete lessons and exercises for each one. Until this process becomes the way you think on the board. What I showed you today is just a fraction of what's in the course, so the link is in the description and in the pinned comment. Click now, because if you stop here, you already know how this story ends. If you enjoyed and learned something new, make sure to hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and I'll see you in the next video.